What I deeply know is that when we individually ignore trauma and grief, we ignore the very humanity of ourselves. When organizations and systems ignore trauma, ignore grief, ignore the humanity of their people, they lose trust, they lose talent, and they lose impact. That very thing we say we want to do. But when we can learn how to embed safety, embed kindness and empathy, when we can embed accountability into our culture, that's when transformation happens. Welcome to Mindful Management. I'm Shenandoah Chefalo, and today I'm going to do something a little different, at least for me. I'm going to dive into my why. Why do I do this work? Now, sometimes you might say, shouldn't you start a podcast as the first episode to be the why episode? And you're probably not wrong, but I very rarely do things in the orders that most people wish I would do them or that I should even do them at all. My brain doesn't work like everybody else's, and maybe that's what makes it a little bit funny. I also was supposed to record this episode a week ago, but it's been sitting on my desk and I've been pushing it off and pushing it off. Lots of really valid reasons about pushing it off, but we'll get to that a little bit later. I want to talk to you about why I talk about trauma-informed care, why I lead conversations on burnout, and why I find myself writing books for adults and children, even when I never thought I'd be an author, and why I truly believe culture work inside organizations is some of the most important and critical work that we can do. So first, let's start from the beginning. Some of our listeners know this about me, but I grew up in the foster care system, and like way too many others. In fact, about 500,000 kids in the United States foster care system today as I record this. And not unlike their stories, I moved from home to home with my belongings packed in a garbage bag. No stability, no support, and frankly, no emotional safety. Now, it's hard to describe what that does to your nervous system, to your sense of worth, and to your ability to really trust anyone. I wrote about this in my memoir, aptly named Garbage Bag Suitcase. Can't imagine why I wrote the book on that. And while it's a story of survival, it's much more than that to me. It's also about becoming, of finding my voice and my purpose through a system that frankly was never designed for healing. And I think that's a really important piece, that choice around healing. Now, a lot of people told me that writing the book would be cathartic. People have asked me for many years since writing that first book, was it cathartic? Did you find healing? And I find myself often sharing a hard truth. No, it wasn't cathartic for me. In fact, it was super painful for me to write that book. It was exposing pieces and parts of myself that I had never intended to do, that I really wanted to keep hidden, even from myself. But what I've learned during my time in care, and mostly in the years after, was that the trauma we carry doesn't just magically go away. We carry it into schools, into relationships, into jobs. And if we never learn how to address it, it becomes the quiet driver behind conflict, burnout, disconnection, and suffering. I'm pausing there not just for dramatic purposes, but even as I say those words, it hurts. I say often to people I'm training, I actually don't do this work for my clients. I know that's what most people want you to say, what most business owners are supposed to say. I do this for the joy of my clients, for helping them to heal. That's not true for me. That's a bonus for me. The truth for me is that I started doing this work for myself. I knew that I needed to be held accountable every day, or I would go back to my old ways of thinking, my own limiting beliefs. And I eventually realized I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to transform systems. Because as I was writing Garbage Bag Suitcase, it became quite clear to me that not only were kids and families in a lot of pain, and there were lots of people who claimed to want to help kids and families, but they too were in pain. And that's why I thought transforming systems was so important. Because the workplace is where we spend a majority of our adult lives. And if we can change the culture at work, if we can make it safer, more inclusive, more healing, more kindness, more positivity at work, imagine the positive parallel process that begins for kids, for families, for people, communities everywhere. What I deeply know is that when we individually ignore trauma and grief, we ignore the very humanity of ourselves. When organizations and systems ignore trauma, ignore grief, ignore the humanity of their people, they lose trust, they lose talent, and they lose impact. That very thing we say we want to do. But when we can learn how to embed safety, embed kindness and empathy, when we can embed accountability into our culture, that's when transformation happens. Okay? Well, then why was I so afraid to talk about this episode? To reach in and to tell you about my why? Well, I'll tell you. I recently released my first children's book. It's called The Best Bunny, and it's really a book about loss, about what happens when we lose someone or something that mattered deeply to us, and how we frankly learn not to move on, but to carry that grief with us. And that's where me getting into my why derailed this week. Me wanting to do this podcast. I'm not even sure if I can share it without still tearing up. It's still a little bit of a fresh wound, but I released that book really with this idea of helping not just kids, but adults transform and understand grief in a very different way. And then I received some really harsh feedback on a day that was supposed to be filled with relief and happiness about putting this big creative thing out into the world. Instead, I was met with someone saying that I had no idea what grief was, that I had no way of understanding grief, and that I had no expertise and was frankly simplifying the way kids understand and process grief. And it hurt. And so I started to wonder, am I doing the work that I'm meant to do? You might be wondering, why would a leadership consultant even write a book for kids? Because I know the truth. Grief doesn't start in adulthood, and neither does healing. It might not be something the person who wrote my book review understands. They don't know me. They knew nothing about me. And that's one of the things about this work I find more and more. Perhaps before offering our feedback, we can offer kindness and compassion. We might be connected to each other first. Because what I know about grief can't be taught in any book. And I know that it doesn't start in adulthood, but neither does our healing. If we can equip young people to understand their emotions, to name their losses, to sit with discomfort, then what we're truly doing is planting the seeds for a future trauma-informed workforce. That's what matters to me. Maybe I'm not the best expert. Maybe there are people who could do it better. I hope they do. But what I didn't see for myself as a kid was someone telling me that it was okay to not be okay. For adults, I hope the book is a mirror, because many of us were never taught how to grieve. Many of us are still carrying old pain into our current lives, our personal lives, our workspaces. And that unprocessed grief often looks like fear, disengagement, burnout, exhaustion beyond all exhaustion. I know we are living in some unfortunate times. Change is happening and it's scary. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. But here's what I do know, and I've seen it over and over again. Policies don't create culture, no matter what level. People do. And if we don't do our inner work to understand ourselves, our triggers, our wounds, our leadership style, to check our own ego, to look at our own limiting beliefs, we will continue replicating harm, even when we have the best of intentions. Culture work is more than DEI work. It's more than DEI statements. It's more than wellness perks. It's not just about emotional safety even, or accountability. It's about creating the kind of workplace where people feel seen, supported, and able to do their best work. I truly believe in people. That's what trauma-informed, human-centered leadership is really about. It's not about being perfect. I know I'm not perfect. I haven't met anyone who is. But it's about presence, about slowing down enough to be intentional, to say, I see you as you fully are. I see you when you're doing your best, and I see you when you're trying to do your best. And so that's my why. I do this work not because it's easy. It's anything but. Every day I find myself questioning myself. But because I know what it feels like to move through a world that isn't built to hold you, I get to dream sometimes and believe in the fact that we can build workplaces and communities that help people heal instead of hide, that lift people up instead of shutting them down. And I believe it starts with small, consistent choices. To be curious instead of judgmental. To pause instead of push. To ask better questions. To be kind when it's not the easiest choice. So I want to thank you for being a part of this journey with me. But I also need you. If this story in any way moved you, can you share this episode? Join us in our community on Mindful Mondays. Read Garbage Bag Suitcase. Read The Best Bunny. Read any independent authors out there. And most of all, just keep showing up for yourself and others with kindness. Until next time, take what you need, try something new, and tell someone else. Be well, my friends. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, Chefalo, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.